Hello and welcome to another episode of Game Theory, the #1 MMA DFS prep show in all of the land.
Say my name.
I am your host, M.O.N.K, aka the Monk-Matician, and in this very episode, we're going to be breaking down all 10 fights at this point.
Wrong!
Coming up on this Saturday's card, UFC 292 live from Boston. We've got some banger fights, 2 title fights to be exact. Sean O'Malley taking on Aljamain Sterling, and Zhang Weili taking on Amanda Lemos for that strawweight championship. Vera is on this card. Ian Machado Garry is on this card. Andre Petroski, who has made the DraftKings optimal lineup in all 4 of his UFC fights, is on this card. The return of Chris Weidman. Holobaugh is coming back. 2 people named Silva, and the return of Holobaugh, Austin Hubbard. So guys, we've got an interesting card here. Hopefully at least 1 or 2 fights gets added. Bautista, and there's possibly a Brad Katona fight that will be added as well.
I never met a fight I didn't like.
Be sure to stick around for the whole video. At the very end, we will show you CM.Monk's picks and predictions for UFC 292, and I will give you the most owned, no nonsense, the Monk pick of the week for UFC 292. Guys, without further ado, let's get right into the card. Before we get into it, let's do a quick breakdown of what the slides are going to look like here. Let's take a look at the very top line, starting from the left, and we'll move left to right. Obviously, the money signs are the current salary. Then we have the KO, TKO, sub, and decision finishes for this fighter. Average time is average fight time in the UFC. Also, all the finishes and decisions are for strictly the UFC. The highlighted record, UFC 7-2, right in the middle, the top center there, that is obviously their UFC record, and those are the stats we are going to be seeing below once we get started here in exact. If you can see, it says in the biggest font on the slide, 3 rounds, in this case LW for lightweight. It's that fighter's exact record relative to the type of fight that they are fighting in this weekend, and here is where this chart will come into play. Last week I started labeling fighters with certain styles based solely on their DraftKings scoring percentages being at distance compared to inside the distance. I got that for their entire UFC careers. I threw it on a scatter point graph, and then I divided it into 12 sectors, and I gave each sector a very rough category name. In this case, fighter A is grappling focus and subpar striking. Fighter B, subpar grappling and striking focus. You see the 3-0 next to it. That is fighter A's record against the style of fighter B. So in this case, fighter A is 3-0 against fighters that display subpar grappling and have a striking focus. And the percentage under that record is the historic win rate of fighter A's style against fighter B's style for all fighters that I have tracked in my entire database. Then on the very right side, it is the fighter's measurables, and that is going to do it, guys. Now that we've broken all that down and got the rules out of the way,
I think there just might be no rules. Promise me 1,000,000 times that you will never do another rule.
let's get right into the fights.
Showtime. We're gonna go nuts in there. Fight.
Killer Karine Silva, $8,300, taking on the Iron Lady Marina Moroz at $7,900. A fantastic women's flyweight right in the mid-range of the DraftKings salaries this week. Let's start with Silva, scoring 3.5 points a minute, allowing just 1.17. She has allowed 0 points so far per minute. No points inside the distance in her 2 UFC wins so far. I know it's been, I think, less than 7 minutes overall, but still, that's, you know how hard that is to not allow any points inside the distance in 7 minutes. 2 first-round finishes for Karine Silva, so 90 bonus points on average. Only one of those fights, though, did she break 100 points, so that is a bit disappointing. Has controlled so far 100% of all grappling time she's involved in. Her strength of schedule is 68.67, and her average ownership so far for Karine Silva, a huge 41%. That said, she is $450 under her average salary this week, but possibly for good reason here against Marina Moroz, who doesn't have a good pace overall. In fact, inside the distance, she's getting outscored 2.5 points to 3 points per minute, only scoring 81 points per win so far over 6 UFC wins, but she has somewhat of a decent ceiling at 107, and that just tells me that in 1 or 2 fights she's overperformed her average DraftKings score, and we shouldn't really count on that as consistent going forward. That said, she gives up 91 DraftKings points per loss, 22% takedown accuracy, landing less than 0.7 takedowns per 15 minutes, and only a 47% takedown defense. On average since 2021, Marina Moroz is only 14% owned, and she is $300 under her average salary this week. Average value per win is less than 11, and only 1 of her 6 wins has come in the first round. No knockdown so far, but she has thrown up, I believe, 6 submissions. The submission index is how many submissions you've thrown up versus takedowns that you have landed, and a virtually identical strength of schedule to Karina Silva. This one's going to be close. I do love the women's flyweight fight. Women's flyweights now have the highest percent optimal rating out of any weight class at 54.64%, making optimal 50 times out of 92 fights since 2021. That's even higher than middleweight and featherweight. Women's flyweight reigns supreme for the time being, so I do love to target women's flyweight fight. That said, I don't know how many points this one could score. Silva does average 101 per win, which is good. Moroz allowing over 91, which is okay, could be worse. Yeah, this is going to be a tough one this week, but at 8,300 and 7,900, you can easily get to both sides and take a little risk here, playing one of these women's flyweights in your lineups. Here we have one of 2 Silvas on the card.
That man's an imposter. That man is the imposter.
Natalia Silva taking on Andrea Lee. Silva, $9,400 this week, a perfect 3-0 in the UFC with 2 KO TKO victories, and we do have a Southpaw versus Orthodox match here to consider. Very good overall pacing for Silva, more than 2-1 to her opponents. At distance, it's even better than that, 4.5 points a minute, allowing just 1. Inside the distance, she's even outscoring her opponents by 0.3 points per minute. Little disappointing DraftKings points per win, however, 93.09 points. And she did put up 108 against Victoria Leonardo, 85 against Teresa Bleda, and 85 against Double J, Jasmine Jasudavicius.
Oh, is that so?
Yeah, that is so.
93% takedown defense, allowing just half a takedown per 15 minutes. Controls only 29% of all grappling time she is involved in. However, her power index is fantastic for a women's flyweight fighter, 1.24. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but believe me, that is a very big power index. Strength of schedule over her last 5 fights is just 67.81, so a little bit left to be desired there. Average value per win, subpar at 10.87. 9,400, I mean, I think she paid off her $9,700 price tag when she put up 109 against Victoria Leonardo, rather, but I'd have to go back and check on that. She has made the optimal lineup in 1 out of her past 3 fights. I just don't know how she's going to score overall, if she's going to be able to pay off that salary, because as of now, she's not even averaging 10x over her current salary. Andrea Lee outpacing her opponents on average 3.5 to about 3 points a minute. At distance, inside the distance, she's got them as well. DraftKings points per win, even less than Silva at 91.25 points, but Lee allows less than 88 points per DraftKings loss. She also has a very large floor at 63.69. Lee is 5-5 in the UFC, and 2 of those wins she has scored over 100 points. Has a 58% takedown accuracy, which is very good, landing over 2 takedowns per 15 minutes, but she has a poor takedown defense at just 54%, allowing more takedowns per 15 than she's giving up. Controls almost half the grappling time she's involved in, and has an over 12x average salary, which we love to see. Her last 5 strength of schedule is a bit worse than Natalia Silva, as she has lost to Roxanne Manafari, Vivian Araujo, and Macy Barber, beating Cynthia Calvillo. I like Silva for this fight for sure. I just don't know, A, if she's going to be able to get it done against Lee inside the distance. 8 of her 10 UFC fights have gone all 15 minutes. And if Silva does go 15 minutes, I just don't know if she's going to pay off that extremely high salary. I believe she is the 3rd highest salaried fighter on this entire card. So I'm going to want to see some projected ownerships here, but I'm going to have a hard time getting to field weight, I think, this week on Natalia Silva, even though I do like her for the win. This one between Andre Petroski and Gerald Meerschaert is going to be a grappler's delight.
Now, what new here is not a test. I'm rapping to the beat.
8,800 for Petroski, 4-0 in the UFC, and one of only a couple of fighters, I could look, but I'm not going to, a couple of fighters that have a 100% win rate and a 100% optimal lineup rate in their UFC career, as Petroski has made the optimal lineup in all 4 of his UFC fights so far. Every single number on this page is extremely good for Petroski, except his last 5 strength of schedule. It's just a bit subpar at 69. Overall pacing is fantastic, more than tripling up his opponent's 4.7 points a minute, allowing just 1.2. Inside the distance, he's scoring just under 6 points a minute and allowing less than half a point per minute. Average DraftKings points per win is 105. Very good ceiling at 114. 3 of his 4 wins over 157% takedown accuracy, and he is landing takedowns at a rate of 5.5 per 15 minutes. That is an extra 25 or 30 points per fight that you get from Andre Petroski. Controls 93% of all grappling time he's involved in. Average value per win is 12.36. Fantastic. And now he's taking on Gerald Meerschaert, who is 3-0 against fighters with Petroski's style, but on average, his pacing is just mediocre at best. Inside the distance, he is scoring very well, 3.5 points per minute, but that's what he's giving up as well. Averaging just 94 points per win and giving up 97 per loss. So not a ton of DraftKings points overall in Gerald Meerschaert fights. His last 100-point outing was against Mahmoud Muradov, in which he subbed him in the second round and scored 100.85 points. Average ceiling, decent floor at 40 points for sure. 4 of his 10 wins have netted him over 100 points. Meerschaert has a 29% takedown defense and allows just under 2 takedowns landed per 15 minutes. Another guy with an average value of over 12. You love to see that. And a ton of round 1 finishes, 3 finish wins and 4 finish losses for Meerschaert. You love to target fights that have numbers like that for one guy or the other, as he does have a history of getting finished or finishing in the very first round. Decent power index, big chindex for his opponents, same with his sub index as well, and a 75 strength of schedule is very, very good. I love this fight for DraftKings. I'll probably be rooting for Petroski, quite honestly, but I do like Gerald Meerschaert, but Petroski's DraftKings numbers are just levels above Gerald for the most part, and I think his upside is much higher in a win is Petroski. So give me Petroski at 8,800. That said, I will of course have some Gerald Meerschaert at 74, as he can get finishes at any time from his back especially. So give me some of both sides of this fight, but I'll likely be a little bit heavier on Andre Petroski. Two fighters we have not seen in quite a long time. Brad Katona taking on Cody Gibson. Brad Katona, 2-2 in the UFC, has not had a fight in almost 4 years. And in his 4 fights, we don't have very many good stats to look at. Getting outpaced overall, at distance basically even with his opponent. Inside the distance, getting outpaced by over half a point per minute. Scoring only 78 points per win on average. Very low ceiling of 92.5. Decent floor of 38.6. Takedown defense is sub 50, allowing 2.25 takedowns per 15 minutes. Controls 61% of the grappling time. That is the one, basically good number on this entire card. No power index, no chindex, no subs thrown up. 69 strength of schedule is pretty much right about where you want it. You'd like to see it at 70. We are less than a point under that. Cody Gibson on the other side, getting outpaced by half point per minute. At distance, he is outpacing his opponents by half a point per minute. Inside the distance, 3 points scored, giving up 4 points. He is 1-3 in his 4 UFC fights. 126 points is what he scored. His floor is decent at 42, almost 43 points. Lands just under 2 takedowns per 15 minutes, and that's exactly how many takedowns get landed on him as well. 37% of all grappling time Gibson controls. A good power index, as he has scored a knockdown in the UFC, and he has also been knocked down in the UFC. 72.80 is about 2.5 points better than Brad Katona. I don't have much to say about this fight. You should definitely do your fight tape here. None of the DraftKings numbers are jumping out to me except for Gibson's 1 win. He put up a crazy amount of points, but other than that, this is definitely a fight you will want to tape. I don't have too much advice to give here. Just take a look at the stats. Katona's are not very good, and Gibson's for the most part aren't very good either. Here we have Austin Hubbard taking on Kurt Holobaugh. I believe this is one of the tough finals. Let's start with Austin Hubbard, $8,400, 3-4 in his first stint in the UFC. And no stats are really jumping out at me here other than his average ownership, which is just 13%. And it's highlighted green because you can get easy leverage for the most part when you compare it to his previous ownership. And he is coming in right at his average salary. Strength of schedule is decent at 71. You want it to be anywhere above 70. That's pretty good. No knockdowns against, no submission attempts at all. 94 bonus points per win is all you're going to get. Extremely low volume with Hubbard. Basically even overall with his opponents as far as pace, outstriking his opponents by half a strike, outpointing his opponents at distance, but inside the distance, getting outpaced by almost a point per minute. Very low ceiling, decent floor of 38.5. Like I said, nothing really too special about any of these numbers. And you could say the same thing about Kurt Holobaugh, although his volume is much higher than Austin Hubbard's overall. Inside the distance, he is getting outpaced almost 2-1. No wins, giving up 97.5 points per loss. By popular demand, I did put takedown defense back in here, and Kurt Holobaugh has a terrible one at 43%, allowing almost 3 3 takedowns per 15 minutes, controlling just 34.5% of all grappling time he's involved in. One of his 4 losses, he is 0-4 in the UFC, and it should be mentioned he had quite the run there of good opponents. Steven Siler was his first fight in the UFC. Then about 5 years later, Raoni Barcelos, Shane Burgos, and Thiago Moises. Welcome back to the UFC, Kurt Holobaugh. Take on these 3 killers for us.
I was supposed to die, but a fish bumped me out with its nose.
So obviously 0-4 so far in the UFC, but he has scored a knockdown, at least one, and been knocked down and gone for submissions and had submissions put on him. Last 5 strength of schedule is pretty good at almost 73. As I mentioned, those 3 killers that he lost to last will probably do wonders for your overall strength of schedule. I guess we're going to have to do our fight tape here and watch tough.
Hell no, to the no, 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 hell to the no.
I hate to want to do that, but maybe I'll just listen to some cappers break this down because I don't really want to watch tough. But yeah, I guess I'm leaning Hubbard, although I'm not really going for picks, just trying to present the best DraftKings information I can to help you construct those GPP lineups. So guys, those are the numbers for this fight. Let's keep it moving. Next, we have Gregory Rodrigues, 9,500, second highest salaried fighter on the entire card, taking on Dennis Tiuliulin at $6,700. 6,700 has about a 4% win rate since 2021, so automatically I tend to fade that one into oblivion, and now I can do it even further because it is Dennis Tiuliulin, who's only beaten Jamie Pickett so far in the UFC. Lost to Jun Park first round submission, lost to Kizriev second round submission. Gregory Rodrigues has 4 pro submissions, none in the UFC as of yet, but still he is capable of getting submissions going here, especially against Dennis Tiuliulin, who really has no good numbers to speak of. I mean, the only good things I can say about him is what he did against Jamie Pickett, and that was Jamie Pickett. Like, RoboCop should be way above Jamie Pickett as far as skills go, even if he hasn't looked great recently against Bruno Ferreira. But before that, he's beaten Jun Park, he smashed Julian Marquez, 3 knockdowns, put up 141 points in that fight, and then came back against Chidi Njokuani, bringing truth to the RoboCop nickname, as that was the fight he got cut. So he just had, if you count his eyes, he just had that bar going across his entire face like RoboCop. But yeah, the numbers for Tiuliulin are kind of crazy. I'm just going to throw most of them out. He went off against Jamie Pickett, 79. He was an underdog in that fight, and he scored 123 points. So yeah, he's got a decent strength of schedule in his last 5, 73.6, and he is $800 under his average salary. But again, we are at the cursed salary of $6,700, about a 4% win rate there. Now we have Holobaugh, 4-2 in the UFC, 3 wins by KO TKO, and all of his numbers are fantastic for DraftKings, guys. Fantastic pace overall, almost 2-1. Great DraftKings stats overall, 4.5 points a minute, allowing just 2.67. Inside the distance, Rodrigues is scoring 7 points a minute and allowing less than 2. 111 points per win. 3 of his 4 wins over 100. 53% takedown defense is fantastic. Almost 2.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. A 100% takedown defense, controls 70.5% of the grappling time. I mean, I could go on, and I will. Average value per win is almost 14. 1 of his 4 wins first round finish. I mean, a great power index. He has been knocked down himself. A decent strength of schedule at 71.2. I mean, what else do we want from a DraftKings player here? At 9,500 is a great salary to target, as well as it does make the optimal lineup about 40% of the time, regardless of win or loss. Actually, I just looked, it's 45%. So yeah, I like Holobaugh here. I do not really like Dennis Tiuliulin for much at all. I'll probably be fading him pretty hard this week, but I do think Rodrigues is a great play for GPP tournaments and probably cash tournaments as well. Next up, we have Brad Tavares and the return of Chris Weidman. Let's start with Tavares at 9K, 14-8 in the UFC, and he's put up rather pedestrian numbers overall. His last 5 strength of schedule is pretty good at 74, well above average, but his average value per win is less than 8.5. He scores 71.6 points per win across 14 UFC wins, barely above 2 points a minute overall and inside the distance, and he is below that number at distance. That said, his opponents don't put up much volume against him either. Only 1 of his wins so far has netted him over 100 points. 1 out of 14 wins. Has an 81% takedown defense, which is going to come in very handy, I would imagine, against Chris Weidman this week. Controls 45% of all grappling time he is involved in. Has been finished in the first round 3 of 8 times, which is something we do love to see for DraftKings, we look at his opponent. This week, that opponent is the return of Chris Weidman. Like I said, it has been almost 2.5 years since that fateful day when Weidman fought Uriah Hall, but overall he is outpacing his opponent's 3.67 points a minute to just over 2. At distance, getting outpaced, but inside the distance obviously is where Chris Weidman shines, scoring almost 6 points a minute, allowing just over 2. Decent ceiling and floor, 47% takedown accuracy, but he is landing almost 4 takedowns per 15 minutes. And if you're doing the math there, that's an extra 20 points in a 3-round fight. 85% of all grappling time Chris is involved in, he is controlling. 3 of his 11 UFC wins did come in the first round, and he has been finished twice himself in the very first round. Good power index and chindex, at least when it comes to DraftKings. He is knocking people down and getting knocked down, and a very good strength of schedule as well. All that said, I don't have to tell you this. Weidman is coming off a 2.5-year layoff, and when he severely broke his leg, had to teach himself how to walk again, and now he is in a fight against the extremely durable and tough Brad Tavares. Tavares is 3-2 against people that have Chris Weidman's fight style, and he's only 11% owned on average. That said, he's going to be well over that number this week. I believe his highest ownership since 2021 was against Bruno Silva, and on average that was only about 14%. So I imagine he's going to be well over that this week. And at 71 DraftKings points per win, only one of his wins over 100, I might have to come in under the field. That said, I'm not going to necessarily fade Brad Tavares because I definitely don't trust Chris Weidman unfortunately coming off of that injury, but I don't know if I'm going to be much higher than 20-ish% on him, to be completely honest. Hopefully Weidman can at least stay in there, land a takedown or something. That said, Tavares has a very good takedown defense, and I believe stuffed every single takedown DDP went for in that fight. So this is going to be a tough one, especially for DraftKings. I don't think it scores well unless Tavares gets Weidman out of there early, which is a possibility. That's why I'm going to be sitting around 20 to 25%, but I really do believe even at 9K, Tavares' ownership could be 30-35%, possibly even north of that this week. Very exciting bantamweight fight. Chito Vera, 8,600, taking on Pedro, the young Punisher, Munhoz, 7,600. Let's start with Munhoz. Overall pacing's not great, under 3 points overall and at distance, but inside the distance, 5.67 points a minute, but he does allow 4 points a minute. Great numbers for DraftKings for both him and his opponent. Scoring only 96 points on average over 10 UFC wins, a bit subpar, and he only allows 81 per loss, so not really something you would want to target just based solely on those numbers. Decent ceiling and floor, meaning that occasionally Pedro Munhoz does score very well, but in his last 5 we have seen none of that. 72 against Gutierrez and 68 against Jimmy Rivera. Average value per win is very good though, 13.10. 5 of his 10 UFC wins have come in the very first round. Takedown defense 82%, and he controls 71.23% of all grappling time he's involved in. 6 of Pedro Munhoz's 10 wins have scored over 100 points, so it's just lately that he has not been scoring well. Early in his UFC career, lots of 100-point victories for Pedro Munhoz. Throws up a ton of subs per takedown landed. Power index very good and has a very good strength of schedule as well, but so does Chito Vera at 75. Chito overall, his pacing leaves a lot to be desired both at distance and inside the distance, and he's only averaging 94 points per win, allowing just 80. So both him and Pedro Munhoz, on average, their DraftKings numbers not great when it comes to wins and losses, but both guys do have pretty decent floors. Chito controls only 33% of all grappling time he's involved in, but does have a decent 70% takedown defense. Very good power index, never been knocked down. Very good sub index, and never had a sub thrown up against him. So Chito's constantly looking to finish the fight, which is what we are looking for. Notoriously slow starter, but once you get into those later rounds, that's when he starts to put the pace on. He is 3-0 against fighters with Pedro Munhoz's fighting style, and Pedro is 6-2 against people with subpar grappling with a striking focus. Very interesting fight here. I think I do like this one a little bit for DraftKings. I don't know how much I'm going to get to it. I'm not going to be going crazy with this. This is not an all-in fight by any means, and I think I do favor Chito, but I'm just not sure. The DraftKings numbers, some of them are good, some of them leave a little bit to be desired, but it's clear that Pedro Munhoz over his career has better numbers. The only problem is lately they have been a bit lackluster. So I don't know what I'm going to do with this fight. 86 and 7,600, 2 decent salaries to play, 2 very easy salaries to get to. But yeah, long story short, this is one I want to have some exposure to, probably about 50-50 when it comes to GPPs as far as my total ownership. Here we have Mario Bautista taking on M.O.N. Blackshear on extremely short notice. If you weren't paying attention, M.O.N. Blackshear just pulled off the third twister submission in UFC history this past weekend on Jose Johnson.
Out of the fucking blue!
Now he's turning around on 7 days notice to fight Mario Bautista here. Here are the numbers for that. They have no salaries yet. I assume it's going to be 85 and 77 or 87 and 75, something like that, around that range. I would assume. I was originally assuming Bautista would be more than that, but the twister is probably going to bring that price down a little bit. Bautista's 6-2 in the UFC. Overall pacing is very good. 4.2 points a minute to 2.7. Inside the distance, fantastic. More than doubling up his opponents and scoring almost 6 points a minute. 103 points per win. 113.5 point ceiling, 67 bonus points per win on average across 6 wins, and 4 of those 6 wins have netted him over 100 points. 69% takedown accuracy, almost 3 takedowns landed per 15 minutes. 63% takedown defense, a little bit lower than what you would want it to be, and he is giving up over 1.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, but controlling 73% of all grappling time he is involved in. Average salary is $91.60, so I'm hoping he will come in under that this week at 85 or 87, like I said, but you never know with DraftKings. We will have to wait and find out. 11.24 average value for Bautista. 3 of his UFC wins coming inside the first round. 1 of his UFC losses also in the first round. Has been knocked down, has knocked people down, has thrown submissions up, and has had submissions thrown against him. Nothing too crazy. The Chindex is a bit worrisome at almost 1, but at least we know both sides are looking for finishes in Mario Bautista fights generally. 72 strength of schedule. Let's get to M.O.N. Blackshear here. Very high ceiling, 115 points. Very good floor at 42. 80 bonus points per win on average over his 2 UFC wins. Both have netted him over 100 points. 55% takedown defense.
55 burgers, 55 fries, 55 tacos, 55 pies, and 155 taters.
Okay, that'll be $680.
Okay.
But it really does appear that you do not want to go to the ground with this guy. If he's pulling off twisters, I think that's, safe to say. 20% ownership on average for M.O.N. Blackshear. I assume he will be a little bit higher than that against Bautista. I think this is going to be a very high-owned fight. Blackshear 14x average value per win. Almost a 70 strength of schedule, so some great numbers here. It should be noted that Mario Bautista is 2-0 against fighters with M.O.N. Blackshear's style. I think this is a great fight to target on DraftKings. I'm so glad they kept Mario on the card, and glad to see M.O.N. Blackshear making a quick turnaround. I don't know how the weight cut's going to go. Cutting to 135 twice. I guess I don't know if this is going to be at catch weight. I kind of assume this will be at like 140 pounds, something like that. Probably make it a catch weight for the extremely quick turnaround for M.O.N. Blackshear. But again, I love this fight for DraftKings. I can't wait to see what the salaries are, and I am looking forward to rostering both sides of this one. Here we have the most expensive fighter on the entire card, Machado Garry, 9,600, taking on short notice replacement Neil Magny. If you remember, Machado Garry was supposed to fight Jeff Neal. Neal pulled out, and in step another Neil Magny.
That man's an imposter. That man is the imposter.
Let's look at Magny's numbers first. 6,600, scoring just 91 points per win as far as DraftKings go, and when he does lose, allowing 101. Magny's 21-9 in the UFC. He has been finished 7 of those 9 times. That is a 77% finish loss rate, and 4 of those finishes have come in the very first round, so I'm automatically looking towards Machado Garry for DraftKings here. That said, Neil Magny, 41% takedown accuracy, averaging almost 2.5 takedowns landed per 15 minutes. Garry has a bit of a subpar takedown defense, which we will get to in a minute. 19% ownership for Neil Magny, so if you're on the Magny side this week, you could easily get some positive leverage here, averaging a value of 11 per win. 76.73 last 5 strength of schedule is fantastic. Let's take a look at Garry. Overall pacing is very good, except when it comes to inside the distance, scoring just 2.5 points a minute and allowing 4.5. Now, as I mentioned before, Magny scores 2.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, and Garry has a 64% takedown defense, which isn't the worst ever, but it's also not great. It's about average, maybe a little bit below where you would want to see it. Controls only 25% of all grappling time he's involved in. Average value of just 10.5, and that's because he's only scoring 96 points per win so far over his perfect 5-0 UFC career.
Where's the rest? Yeah, where's the rest?
2 of those wins, however, are round 1 finishes, and those would have been against Daniel Rodrigues in his very first fight against Jordan Williams. He went the distance with Gabe Green and Darian Weeks, scoring just 95 points against Green and 62 against Weeks, an extremely low number that is definitely holding back his DraftKings points per win total. 1.12 power index is fantastic, but Machado Garry has also been knocked down in his UFC career. Decent strength of schedule at just under 71. I don't know what to do about this fight as far as DraftKings. Part of me wants to fade it a little bit because Ian Machado Garry's salary is so high at 9,600. That said, 3 of his 5 wins have been over 100, and Magny does love to get finished 7 of 9 times. Like I said, only 2 by KO TKO. Magny usually gets subbed if he is losing, and Ian Garry has no UFC subs, as you would imagine. Maybe I'll play a little bit of Garry. I think he's probably going to go over-own this week, and I do think he can finish Neil Magny, especially on short notice. But Neil Magny's also been to decision 16 times in his UFC career. Man, I'm probably going to just be under the field when it comes to both sides of this one, although I do like Garry to win. I just don't know if he's going to do enough to pay off that extremely high $9,600 salary. Co-main event of the evening and the first of 2 title fights that we are going to witness at UFC 292. Zhang Weili, 9,200, taking on Amanda Lemos for the strawweight championship. I love this fight for DraftKings. Zhang Weili has scored tremendously over her UFC career. 6 points a minute inside the distance, allowing just 2.5. Overall, she's at 4 points a minute, a fantastic number. 107 points per win, very high ceiling, very good floor at 80 points per loss overall. I mean, that's ridiculous. 4 of her 7 UFC wins have scored her over 100 points. 2 takedowns landed per 15 minutes and has a decent takedown defense at almost 70%. Controls 61% of all grappling time she is involved in. The only bad numbers here, obviously, she's very high owned, 39% on average overall, and she is 400 over her average salary, almost 12 average value. 2 of her 7 UFC wins have come in the very first round, and she has a decent strength of schedule at 72.58. So I do like the numbers I'm seeing for Zhang Weili. Let's check out Amanda Lemos. She also has some fantastic numbers, good pacing overall, especially at distance with her at distance pacing defense. Only 95 points per win, and she does allow 104 when she loses over her 2 losses. The last one being Jessica Andrade when she got standing arm triangled in the very first round. Not a loss that has aged well by any means. 3 of her 7 wins have netted her over 100 points, 82% takedown defense, which is very impressive for Amanda Lemos. Controls only 45% of all grappling time she is involved in. She is coming in well under her average salary of $8,600 this week.
At that price point, he can hit.
And her average value leaves a little bit to be desired at just 10.76. 3 of her 4 wins, first round finishes, and she has been finished once in the very first round as well. Very good power index at 1.66, never been knocked down. She does throw up submissions, her opponents throw up submissions, so Amanda Lemos is always looking to finish the fight, which is exactly what we want to see for DraftKings. Does have a sub 70 strength of schedule, but it's not too bad at 69. 0.02. Again, I love this fight for DraftKings. We get a 5-rounder here. I really don't know who's going to win. I'm favoring Zhang Weili just a little bit, but I could easily see a path where Amanda Lemos is getting it done, especially on the feet, as that is where Zhang Weili has run into some problems before. So yeah, I like both sides of this one. I'm interested to see the projected ownerships this week once we get a little bit later into the week, because if Zhang Weili is 40% owned, I just don't know how much I'm going to be able to get to her. She could come out here and dominate Amanda Lemos, but I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. I think Lemos is a very good fighter. I just don't know if she's going to be able to get a finish over Zhang Weili. Long story short, I will be playing both sides of this fight, even at Lemos at a very, very low underdog price. Lemos' path to victory should pay off pretty well at $7K, and any win at that price range should land her pretty close to the optimal lineup, so I will have Lemos rostered for GPP lineups. Zhang Weili may be more of a cash play for me, but I don't think it's necessarily, you know, the safest play on the entire card by any means, and 9,200 is a bit pricey, again 400 over her average salary, but that said, there's also a path for Zhang Weili to get a finish over Amanda Lemos, or just perform very, very well consistently over 5 rounds. So I like the scoring upside for Zhang Weili even at 9,200, and like I said, Amanda Lemos has a path to the optimal lineup with almost any win at that salary. It should also be noted that someone from 5-round fights has made the optimal lineup 62.77% of the time since 2021, and in title fights it is 63.46%, so just something to keep in mind there when constructing lineups this week. All right, everybody, we did it. Hit the like, hit the sub on this channel, and now we are going to be getting into the numbers for the main event, UFC 292, taking place between Funk Master Aljamain Sterling and Sugar Sean O'Malley. Let's start with Aljamain Sterling. Why not?
These fucking wrestlers just keep coming in.
His numbers are fantastic. Overall, 3.65 points per minute, allowing just over 2. At distance is pretty pedestrian, but still outscoring his opponents. And inside the distance, obviously, is where he does his best work, scoring almost 4 points a minute, allowing just over 2. Average DraftKings points per win over 15 UFC wins is 100.84 points.
Triples makes it safe. Now, triples is best. Yeah. That's good.
And he allows just 77. Very good ceiling of almost 118. 5 of his 15 UFC wins have netted Aljo over 100 points, and he is landing 2 takedowns per 15 minutes overall. 62% of all grappling time he's involved in, he is controlling. A very subpar takedown defense at just 45%, but who in their right mind would be taking Aljo down?
I can't let you get close.
His average value per win is fantastic at almost 13. Very, very good strength of schedule, possibly the best on the entire card at 78.7. No knockdowns, but he is throwing up a few submissions, obviously, at 0.39 per takedown landed, and he has been knocked down before, 0.69. Index, you want that number to be 0. 0.69 does not sound like a lot, but it is a bit concerning when you're fighting a guy like Sugar Sean O'Malley, who is scoring 4 points a minute at distance, allowing just 1.5 inside the distance. O'Malley is giving up 6.14 points a minute, almost 100 points per win, so both of these guys right around the triple digit mark per win. The big difference is when O'Malley loses, and it's only happened once, 0 times if you ask him.
You sure?
He did give up 97 points compared to Aljo's 77. 124 point ceiling is very, very good. 63%. 5 of O'Malley's 8 wins have netted him over 100 points. A subpar takedown defense at just 58%, and he is allowing almost 2 takedowns per 15 minutes and controlling less than 11% of all grappling time he is involved in. O'Malley's average ownership so far since 2021, 49%, and he's $1,500 under his average salary this week, guys. What do you think is going to happen with O'Malley's ownership?
I ain't drinking up.
I think it probably stays right around the 50% mark, to be completely honest. And that's when you're going to have to decide. This is the biggest you're going to have to decide fight on the entire card. You're going to have to pick a side and go pretty hard on it, I think. 3 of his 8 wins have been round 1 finishes. Decent power index, decent sub index as well. And O'Malley has a 74.5 last 5 strength of schedule. So some very good numbers overall. I think Sterling's numbers are just a bit better than O'Malley's in several categories, but O'Malley definitely does what O'Malley does, and that is, you know, a fight altering style. I really like both of these guys a lot. Aljamain Sterling, big fan of him. Sugar Sean O'Malley, fan as well. What's going to happen here, guys? I mean, other than Aljo, what's going to stop Aljo from just backpacking Sugar Sean and doing exactly what he's done in several fights now? I mean, he's beaten Henry Cejudo, TJ Dillashaw, Peter Yan twice, and Corey Sandhagen in his last 5. Meanwhile, Sean O'Malley has guys like Thomas Almeida on his last 5, and Chris Moutinho, Raulian Paiva. No contest against Munhoz, and they have both beaten Peter Yan. But man, Aljo's resume is much, much better than Sean's.
I actually want to go to Haunted House more than I want to go to Aqua.
And I think Sean has a lot more to prove here. Therefore, I will be rostering much more of Aldo than I probably will of Sean O'Malley, even at 8,900. Don't get me wrong, I will have plenty of O'Malley in my lineups. This fight probably close to 100% fight for me. Sterling in his last few 5-round fights, 121 against Cejudo, 151 against Dillashaw, 85, 86 against Peter Yan, 99 against Peter Yan, and 94. So he's really close to 100, if not well over, in his past few fights. So I do favor Sterling. I do favor the DraftKings upside of Sterling, but I will also have my fair share of Sugar Sean O'Malley rostered. Before we get out of here, as promised, let's throw it over to Monk for CM Monk's picks for UFC 292. And here we have CM Monk's picks for UFC 292. If you don't know, CM Monk is a thing I built in Excel that takes many, many data points and uses them in an attempt to make proper picks. Last week, 46%, 6 of 13. On the year, CM Monk is 57.5%. That is just atrocious. You at least want to be at 60. Meanwhile, the fights in blue is my personal record. I didn't do very well myself, beating CM Monk by just 1 fight, and I did dip below the 60% mark for the year. Absolutely shameful, and I will do my best to get that that back up over 60. Guys, that's not why you're here. CM Monk's picks for UFC 292. Only 3 dogs this week, but a couple of them are big dogs. Brad Katona decision over Cody Gibson. Austin Hubbard decision. Karine Silva decision. Natalia Silva decision. Andre Petroski by finish. Gregory Rodrigues by finish. Chris Weidman by finish over Brad Tavares. My goodness. Cheeto Vera by finish. Mario Bautista by finish. Ian Machado Garry by finish. Underdog pick number 1 in the title fight, Amanda Lemos finishing Zhang Weili. And in the main event, Sean O'Malley getting a decision over Aljamain Sterling. I would be very surprised if that happened, but hey, stranger things have occurred. Those are CM Monk's picks for UFC 292. Let's throw it to Monk, and we will get the most owned, no-nonsense pick of the week for this card. The most owned, no-nonsense Monk pick of the week for UFC 292 is none other than the $9,500 Gregory Rodrigues against Dennis Tiuliulin. Long story short, Tiuliulin has only beat Jamie Pickett. I do not put much stock into that at all. So give me Rodrigues. I mean, he looked decent against Cheaty, battled back. He battled back against Jun Young Park as well. Has a bunch of subs on his professional records. I also think he could be finished via ground and pound as well. So give me Gregory Rodrigues at 9,500. I think this is a good spot. Gregory puts up some of the highest DraftKings numbers per win on the entire card at 111.5. His ceiling is the highest on the entire card at 135. I just love the DraftKings numbers from Gregory Rodrigues, and at 9,500, I will have a bunch of him in my DraftKings lineup. In fact, I'll have so much that he will be my most owned, no-nonsense pick of the week for UFC 292.
No, I'm honestly done. I don't want to read anymore.
And there you have it, guys. All 11, well, 10 and a half fights.
Wrong.
Broken down from a DraftKings perspective from UFC 292, hoping to give you that edge when it comes to constructing those GPP lineups, guys. Be sure to look out for any other content I put out this week. The Unnamed Nickname Show happening every Thursday at 9 p.m. Central Time right here on the Monk Maddox channel. I will be on the Pub Sports Radio channel Wednesday nights. I've probably got some other appearances coming up. I have no idea. It is a pay-per-view week, so we are super busy, but I wanted to be sure to get this one out on time, guys. For now, I want all of you to enjoy the fight, so enjoy, and we will see you in the next one.
I love this stuff. Only come here if you like that stuff.